Hello everyone. Welcome to Student Academic Success Services Workshop on Self-Editing. Through this series of videos, we'll be working through the 4 steps of a checklist that you can use to edit your own writing for grammar, sentence structure, and vocabulary. The checklist is not meant to be a fix-all. Rather, it's a tool to help you improve the clarity and effectiveness of your writing and identify your own sentence-level errors. We will work through an example paragraph to illustrate the 4 steps of the checklist. The goal for this workshop series is to show you how you can break up the broad concept of editing for grammar into smaller, more manageable categories and feel more confident about your ability to edit your own work. Before we dive into the example paragraph, I want to bring your attention to some key points to remember. The first is that academic writing varies across the disciplines. The words we use and the way we organize our ideas is very different in, say, biology compared to linguistics or history. When editing, you want to keep in mind the particular conventions of the discipline you're writing for. If you don't know what those are, watch our 3-part video series on the disciplinary analysis tool and how you can use it to write more like a scholar in your field. The next thing I want you to remember is that the writing process is iterative. That is, effective writing typically isn't produced in one straight shot. It is more likely to produce critical writing through a messy process of reading, thinking, drafting, revising, talking over and over again. While editing is typically considered one of the last steps of this process, it is not uncommon for writers to discover that they need to rework or reorganize an idea or a whole paragraph while they're editing for sentence-level issues. This brings me to my next point. No word exists in a bubble. When you edit your writing, instead of editing one word at a time, you want to be thinking about how your words work together to express ideas and how those ideas are connected through words. And finally, remember that grammar is not completely separate from content. It's not some arbitrary set of rules with no rhyme or reason. Rather, think of grammar as a tool to help you communicate your ideas clearly to your reader without causing confusion. The checklist that we're going to be using is available at sas.queensu.ca. On our website, you'll see the tab for online resources, and under that, writing resources. There you'll find a link to the self-editing checklist. This checklist is divided into 4 categories: clarity, structure, connectors, and vocabulary. Each item on the checklist also includes links to other resources that describe that topic in more detail. For example, if you're unsure about how to eliminate wordiness, you can click on that link, which brings you to a resource on 12 tips for eliminating wordiness. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's go through an example together. In this video, we will look at the first category of the checklist, clarity. Watch videos 2 and 3 for the rest of the checklist. This is the paragraph that we will be using throughout this video series. It has been adapted from a 2019 article about climate change to include errors related to the checklist categories. For the sake of this workshop series, each sentence in the paragraph is related to one category of the checklist, but in practice, you will more than likely move between the categories as you edit. For example, if you notice your sentence doesn't have a clear takeaway message while checking for clarity, it might be because of an issue with a connector, say a misleading transition word. I'm now going to read this paragraph through once, and then we will take a closer look at the first sentence. Considering climate change is an urgent problem, the insufficiency from both behavioral and policy responses to either reduce the volume of greenhouse gas emissions or adapt to a disrupted climate system Since significant efforts to raise public awareness of a danger posed by climate change, including work by governments and private corporations, have been made. People need to feel efficacy to solve complex problems. However, the belief that climate change is unstoppable might thwart action even among the concerned. It can be seen in this paper the effect of ridiculous fatalistic beliefs on behavioral change and willingness to pay to address climate change using 2 cross-national surveys which represent many people throughout the world. I imagine you found that quite confusing. You might have understood some of the message or some of the key ideas, but sentence-level editing would really help to clean up this paragraph and present the ideas in a more convincing manner. Let's take a look at that first sentence again and edit it for clarity. By clarity, we're concerned with how well the reader can comprehend your intended message. One of the first things you can ask yourself when editing is, does this have a clear takeaway? When I read this sentence, considering climate change is an urgent problem, the insufficiency from both behavioral and policy responses to either reduce the volume of greenhouse gas emissions or adapt to a disrupted climate system, I can see a couple of key terms in there, like insufficiency and responses, but the overall message is unclear. Sometimes an unclear message can be caused because the main subject and verb of the sentence is missing or hidden. Every single sentence in English needs to have something called an independent clause, which is made up of a subject and a verb. In other words, you need to have a part of the sentence that can stand alone, where someone is doing something. In this sentence, we're missing that. But now that we've identified some words that are central to our takeaway message, we can use them to create an independent clause. And that's what I've done here. I've changed the sentence so it reads, considering climate change is an urgent problem, both behavioral and policy responses have been insufficient to either reduce the volume of greenhouse gas emissions or adapt to a disrupted climate system. So now we have what is technically a grammatical sentence. However, it's still not very clear. The final step of this part of the checklist is to think about modifiers. Modifiers are words, phrases, or clauses that alter another word or another part of a sentence. Here, we have a dangling modifier in the first part of the sentence, considering climate change is an urgent problem. If you think about it, no one in the sentence is actually doing the considering. To fix this, we can think about how we want to connect these 2 ideas and then use a word that's more appropriate. I've chosen to replace considering with although to set up a contrast between the idea in the first part of the sentence with the main idea that appears in the second part of the sentence. Now, let's reread the sentence as a whole. Although climate change is an urgent problem, both behavioral and policy responses have been insufficient to either reduce the volume of greenhouse gas emissions or adapt to a disrupted climate system. By prioritizing our takeaway message and thinking about how we're modifying the main idea, we've created an edited version that is much more clear and easy to understand. That concludes the first part of this series on step 1 of the self-editing checklist. Please tune in to videos 2 and 3 for more strategies on editing your writing. Video 2 will look at structure and connectors, and video 3 will look at vocabulary. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.